Hey crew, it's Barrett, and I'm back with some more freedom. Today we're going to be diving back into the Federalist Papers. We will be reviewing Federalist Papers number 24 and 25, the powers necessary for the common defense. We are doing this as an energetic investment. I am reading this aloud so that we are investing our energy into our union. We are discussing and understanding why we have the Constitution and how they convinced the 13 colonies to become the one great nation that we eventually became. And so today we're going to pick up where we left off. We're in Federalist number 24 because we left off in number 23. This is the powers necessary for the common defense, further considered for the Independent Journal, authored by Alexander Hamilton to the people of the state of New York. To the powers proposed to be conferred upon the federal government in respect to the creation and direction of the national forces, I have met but with one specific objection, which, if I understand it right, is this: that proper provision has not been made against the existence of standing armies in times of peace. An objection which I shall now endeavor to show rests on weak and unsubstantial foundations. It has indeed been brought forward in the most vague and general form, supported only by bold assertions without the appearance of argument, without even the sanction of theoretical opinions, in contradiction to the practice of other free nations and to the general sense of America, as expressed in most of the existing constitutions. The propriety of this remark will appear the moment it is recollected that the objection under consideration turns upon a supposed necessity of restraining the legislative authority of the nation in the article of military establishments, a principle unheard of except in one or two of our state constitutions and rejected in all the rest. A stranger to our politics who was to read our newspapers at the present juncture without having previously inspected the plan reported by the convention would be naturally led to one of two conclusions: either that it contained a positive injunction that standing armies should be kept up in the time of peace, or that it vested in the executive the whole power of levying troops without subjecting his discretion in any shape to the control of the legislature. If he come afterward to peruse the plan itself, he would be surprised to discover that neither the one nor the other was the case, that the whole power of raising armies was lodged in the legislature, not in the executive, that this legislature was to be a popular body, consisting of the representatives of the people periodically elected, and that instead of the provision he had supposed in favor of standing armies, there was to be found, in respect to this object, an important qualification, even of the legislative discretion, in that clause which forbids the appropriation of money for the support of an army for any longer period than 2 years, a precaution which, upon the nearer view of it, will appear to be a great and real security against keeping up of troops without evident necessity. Disappointed in his first surmise, the person I have supposed would be apt to pursue his conjectures a little further. He would naturally say to himself, "It is impossible that all this vehement and pathetic declamation can be without some colorable pretext. It must needs be that this people, so jealous of their liberties, have, in all the preceding models of the constitutions which they have established, inserted the most precise and rigid precautions on this point, the omission of which, in the new plan, has given birth to all this apprehension and clamor. If, under this impression, he proceeded to pass in review the several state constitutions, how great would be his disappointment to find that only 2 of them contain an interdiction of standing armies in times of peace, that the other 11 had either observed a profound silence on the subject, or had, in express terms, admitted the right of the legislature to authorize their existence. Still, however, he would be persuaded that there must be some plausible foundation for the cry raised on this head. He would never be able to imagine, while any source of information remained unexplored, that it was nothing more than an experiment upon the public credulity, dictated either by a deliberate intention to deceive, or by the overflowings of a zeal too intemperate to be ingenuous. It would probably occur to him that he would be likely to find the precautions he was in search of in the primitive compact between the states. Here, at length, he would expect to meet with a solution of the enigma. No doubt he would observe to himself the existing confederation must contain the most explicit provisions against military establishments in the time of peace, and a departure from this model, in a favorite point, has occasioned the discontent which appears to influence these political champions. If he should now apply himself to a careful and critical survey of the Articles of Confederation, his astonishment would not only be increased, but would acquire a mixture of indignation at the unexpected discovery that these articles, instead of containing the prohibition he looked for, as though they had, with jealous circumspection, restricted the authority of the state legislatures in this particular, had not imposed a single restraint on that of the United States. If he happened to be a man of quick sensibility or ardent temper, he could now no longer refrain from regarding these clamors as the dishonest artifices of a sinister and unprincipled opposition to the plan which ought at least to receive a fair and candid examination from all sincere lovers of their country. How else, he would say, could the authors of them have been tempted to vent such loud censures upon that plan, about a point in which it seems to have conformed itself to the general sense of America as declared in its different forms of government, and in which it has even superadded a new and powerful guard unknown to any of them? If, on the contrary, he happened to be a man of calm and dispassionate feelings, he would indulge a sigh for the frailty of human nature, and would lament that in a matter so interesting to the happiness of millions, the true merits of the question should be perplexed and entangled by expedients so unfriendly to an impartial and right determination. Even such a man could hardly forbear remarking that a conduct of this kind has too much of the appearance of an intention to mislead the people by alarming their passions, rather than to convince them by arguments addressed to their understandings. But, however little this objection may be countenanced, even by precedents among ourselves, it may be satisfactory to take a nearer view of its intrinsic merits. From a close examination, it would appear that restraints upon the discretion of the legislature in respect to military establishments in time of peace would be improper to be imposed, and, if imposed, from the necessities of society, would be unlikely to be observed. Though a wide ocean separates the United States from Europe, yet there are various considerations that warn us against an excess of confidence or security. On one side of us, and stretching far into our rear, are growing settlements subject to the dominion of Britain. On the other side, and extending to meet the British settlements, are colonies and establishments subject to the dominion of Spain. This situation and the vicinity of the West India Islands belonging to these two powers create between them, in respect to their American possessions and in relation to us, a common interest. The savage tribes on our western frontier ought to be regarded as our natural enemies, their natural allies, because they have most to fear from us and most to hope from them. The improvements in the art of navigation have, as the facility of communication, rendered distant nations, in a great measure, neighbors. Britain and Spain are among the principal maritime powers of Europe. A future concert of views between these nations ought not to be regarded as improbable. The increasing remoteness of consanguinity is every day diminishing the force of family compact between France and Spain, and politicians have ever with great reason considered the ties of blood as feeble and precarious links to political connection. These circumstances, combined, admonish us not to be too sanguine in considering ourselves as entirely out of the reach of danger. Previous to the Revolution, and ever since the peace, there has been a constant necessity for keeping small garrisons on our western frontier. no person can doubt that these will continue to be indispensable, and if it should only be against the ravages and depredations of the Indians. These garrisons must either be furnished by occasional detachments from the militia or by permanent corps in the pay of the government. The first is impracticable, and if practicable, would be pernicious. The militia would not long, if at all, submit to be dragged from their occupations and families to perform that most disagreeable duty in times of profound peace. And if they could be prevailed upon or compelled to do it, the increased expense of a frequent rotation of service and the loss of labor and disconcertion of the industrious pursuits of the individuals would form conclusive intentions to the scheme. It would be as burdensome and injurious to the public as ruinous to private citizens. The latter resource of permanent corps in the pay of the government amounts to a standing army in time of peace. A small one, indeed, but not the less real for being small. Here is a simple view of the subject that shows us at once the impropriety of a constitutional interdiction of such establishments, and the necessity of leaving the matter to the discretion and prudence of the legislature. In proportion to our increase in strength, it is probable, nay, it may be said certain, that Britain and Spain would augment their military establishments in our neighborhood. If we should not be willing to be exposed in a naked and defenseless condition to their insults and encroachments, we should find it expedient to increase our frontier garrisons in some ratio to the force by which our western settlements might be annoyed. There are, and will be, particular posts, the possession of which will include the command of large districts of territory and facilitate future invasions of the remainder. It may be added that some of those posts will be keys to the trade with the Indian nations. Can any man think it would be wise to leave such posts in a situation to be at any instant seized by one or the other of two neighboring and formidable powers? To act this part would be to desert all the usual maxims of prudence and policy. If we mean to be a commercial people, and even to be secure on our Atlantic side, we must endeavor, as soon as possible, to have a navy. To this purpose there must be dockyards and arsenals, and for the defense of these fortifications and probably garrisons. When a nation has become so powerful by sea that it can protect its dockyards by its fleets, this supersedes the necessity of garrisons for that purpose. But where naval establishments are in their infancy, moderate garrisons will, in all likelihood, be found an indispensable security against descents for the destruction of the arsenals and dockyards, and sometimes of the fleet itself.
And so ends number 24. And what we get here is the need, right? We are identifying the need to be free. That is basically what it comes down to. I know still today there are people that are not happy that we have a standing army. They still today argue that it is against the Constitution, and it is not. It is only makes sense, right? It only makes sense to have a well-trained and functional military in place, available at any moment to take up arms in the defense of the nation. And at this time, the war was largely won by the militia and the Minutemen, right? The people in times of need who would take up arms in defense of their own land without being part of the standing army. And that was a very large contributing factor to us being a free nation for the first time ever in history. And it doesn't take away the need, however, for us to be able to respond faster. It doesn't get away from the need for us to have disciplined troops that can respond immediately without the need for further drilling prior to. The militia is great. We still have today Minutemen. There are still people today who will take up arms if people start dropping out of the sky or start invading our borders. Theoretically, anyway. And so what we need to know is that the military is absolutely our defense. It is never intended to be used for us, right? Except in extreme extreme situations. Uh, and so that's going to end us on 24. The Federalist paper number 25. Today's going to be a short one because the next section is 3, so this will be a short one, and the next one will be a little bit longer.
The same subject continued. The powers necessary to the common defense further considered. From the New York Packet, Friday, December 21st, 1787, by Alexander Hamilton to the people of the state of New York. It may, perhaps, be urged that the objects enumerated in the preceding number ought to be provided for by the state governments under the direction of the Union. But this would be, in reality, an inversion of the primary principle of our political association, as it would in practice transfer the care of the common defense from the federal head to the individual members, a project oppressive to some states, dangerous to all, and baneful to the Confederacy. The territories of Britain, Spain, and of the Indian nations in our neighborhood do not border on particular states, but encircle the Union from Maine to Georgia. The danger, though in different degrees, is therefore common, and the means of guarding against it ought, in like manner, to be the objects of common councils and of a common treasury. It happens that in some states, from local situation, are more directly exposed. New York is of this class. Upon the plan of separate provisions, New York would have to sustain the whole weight of the establishments requisite to her immediate safety and to the immediate or ultimate protection of her neighbors. This would neither be equitable as it respected New York, nor safe as it respected the other states. Various inconveniences would attend such a system. The states to whose lot it might fall to support the necessary establishments would be as little able as willing for a considerable time to come to bear the burden of competent provisions. The security of all would thus be subjected to the parsimony, improvidence, or inability of a part. If the resources of such part becoming more abundant and extensive, its provisions should be proportionally enlarged. The other states would quickly take the alarm at seeing the whole military force of the Union in the hands of 2 or 3 of its members, and those probably amongst the powerful. They would each choose to have some counterpoise, and pretenses could easily be contrived. In this situation, military establishments, nourished by mutual jealousy, would be apt to swell beyond their natural or proper size, and being at the separate disposal of the members, they would be engines for the abridgment or demolition of the national autocracy. Reasons have already been given to induce a supposition that the state governments will too naturally be prone to rivalships with that of the Union, the foundation of which will be the love of power, and that in any contest between the federal head and one of its members, the people will be most apt to unite with their local government. If, in addition to this immense advantage, the ambition of the members should be stimulated by the separate and independent possession of military forces, it would afford too strong a temptation and too great a facility to make enterprises upon, and finally to subvert the constitutional authority of the Union. On the other hand, the liberty of the people would be less safe in this state of things than in that which left the national forces in the hands of the national government. As far as an army may be considered as a dangerous weapon of power, it had better be in those hands of which the people are most likely to be jealous than in those of which they are least likely to be jealous. For it is a truth which the experience of ages has attested, that the people are always most in danger when the means of injuring their rights are in the possession of those of whom they entertain the least suspicion. The framers of the existing Confederation, fully aware of the danger of the Union from the separate possession of military forces by the states, have, in express terms, prohibited them from having either ships or troops, unless with the consent of Congress. The truth is that the existence of a federal government and military establishments under state authority are not less at variance with each other than a due supply of the federal treasury and the system of quotas and requisitions. There are other lights besides those already taken notice of, which the impropriety of restraints on the discretion of the national legislature will be equally manifest. The design of the objection, which has been mentioned, is to preclude standing armies in times of peace, though we have never been informed how far it is designed the prohibition should extend, whether to raising armies as well as keeping them up in a season of tranquility or not. It will be confined to the latter. If it be confined to the latter, it will have no precise signification, and it will be ineffectual for the purpose intended. When armies are once raised, what shall be denominated keeping them up, contrary to the sense of the Constitution? What time shall be requisite to ascertain the violation? Shall it be a week, a month, a year? Or shall we say they may be continued as long as the danger which occasioned their being raised continues? This would be to admit that they might be kept up in time of peace against threatening or impending danger, which would be at once to deviate from the literal meaning of the prohibition and to introduce an extensive latitude of construction. Who shall judge the continuance of the danger? This must undoubtedly be submitted to the national government, and the matter would then be brought to this issue, that the national government, to provide against apprehended danger, might in the first instance raise troops, and might afterwards keep them on foot as long as they supposed the peace or safety of the community was in any degree of jeopardy. It is easy to perceive that a discretion so latitudinary as this would afford ample room for eluding the force of the provision. The supposed utility of a provision of this kind can only be founded on the supposed probability, or at least possibility, of a combination between the executive and the legislative in some scheme of usurpation. Should this at any time happen, how easy would it be to fabricate pretenses of approaching danger? Indian hostilities investigated by Spain or Britain would always be at hand. Provocations to produce the desired appearances might even be given to some foreign power and appeased again by timely concessions. If we can reasonably presume that such a combination to have been formed, and that the enterprise is warranted by a sufficient prospect of success, the army, when once raised, from whatever cause, and on whatever pretext, may be applied to the execution of the project. If, to obviate this consequence, it should be resolved to extend the prohibition to the raising of armies in that time of peace, the United States would then exhibit the most extraordinary spectacle which the world has yet seen, that of a nation incapacitated by its constitution to prepare for defense before it was actually invaded. As the ceremony of a formal denunciation of war has of late fallen into disuse, the presence of an enemy within our territories must be waited for as the legal warrant to the government to begin its levies of men for the protection of the state. We must receive the blow before we could even prepare to return it. All that kind of policy by which nations anticipate distant danger and meet the gathering storm must be abstained from, as contrary to the genuine maxims of a free government. We must expose our property and liberty to the mercy of foreign invaders, and invite them by our weakness to seize the naked and defenseless prey, because we are afraid that rulers, created by our choice, dependent on our will, might endanger that liberty by an abuse of the means necessary to its preservation. Here I expect that we shall be told that the military is the militia of the country is its national bulwark, and would be at all times equal to the national defense.
This doctrine, in substance, had like to have lost us our independence. It cost millions to the United States that might have been saved. The facts which, from our own experience, forbid a reliance on this kind are too recent to permit us to be dupes of such a suggestion. The steady operations of war against a regular and disciplined army can only be successfully conducted by a force of the same kind. Considerations of economy, not less than of stability and vigor, confirm this position. The American militia in the course of the late war have, by their valor on numerous occasions, erected eternal monuments to their fame. But the bravest of them feel and know that the liberty of their country could not have been established by their efforts alone, however great and valuable they were. War, like most other things, is a science to be acquired and perfected by diligence, by perseverance, and by time. Sorry, I did not realize that I had not swapped that over. You're probably not reading along anyway, but that is not my intention. All violent policy, as is contrary to the natural and experienced course of human affairs, defeats itself. Pennsylvania, at this instant, affords an example of the truth of this remark. The Bill of Rights of that state declares that standing armies are dangerous to liberty and ought not to be kept up in times of peace. Pennsylvania, nevertheless, in a time of profound peace, from the existence of partial disorders in one or two of her countries, has resolved to raise a body of troops, and in all probability will keep them up as long as there is any appearance of danger to the public peace. The conduct of Massachusetts affords a lesson on the same subject, though on different ground. That state, without waiting for the sanction of Congress as the Articles of Confederation require, was compelled to raise troops to quell a domestic insurrection, and still keeps a corps in pay to prevent a revival of the spirit of revolt. The particular Constitution of Massachusetts opposed no article to the measure, but the instance is still of use to instruct us that cases are likely to occur under our government, as well as under those of other nations, which will sometimes render a military force in times of peace essential to the security of society, and that it is therefore improper in this respect to control the legislative discretion. It also teaches us, in its application to the United States, how little the rights of a feeble government are likely to be respected, even by its own constituents. And it teaches us, in addition to the rest, how unequal parchment provisions are to a struggle with public necessity. This was a fundamental maxim of the Lacedaemonian Commonwealth, that the post of admiral should not be conferred twice on the same person. The Peloponnesian confederates, having suffered a severe defeat at sea from the Athenians, demanded Lysander, who had before served with success in that capacity, to command the combined fleets. Thus Lacedaemonians, to gratify their allies and yet preserve the semblance of an adherence to their ancient institutions, had recourse to the flimsy subterfuge of investing Lysander with the real power of admiral, under the nominal title of vice-admiral. This instance is selected from among a multitude that might be cited to confirm the truth already advanced and illustrated by domestic examples, which is, that nations pay little regard to rules and maxims calculated in their very nature to run counter to the necessities of society. Wise politicians will be cautious about fettering the government with restrictions that cannot be observed, because they know that every breach of the fundamental laws, though dictated by necessity, impairs that sacred reverence which ought to be maintained in the breast of rulers towards the constitution of a country, and forms a precedent for other breaches where the same plea of necessity does not exist at all, or is less urgent and palpable. And so we end paper number 25. And this is going to bring us to the wrap-up, because the next section is 3 different letters, and we're going to try and keep those together. But what we have here is the argument for a common standing army. If it is drawn upon by all of the states, then no one particular state is more weighty in the execution of the demands. And that means that, say, your president is from New York and your military is mostly considered or made up from New York because New York had a large population, and that's the only reason I'm using that. This prevents the president, who is from that state, using the army, which is largely made up from that state, for exclusive use in that state. It allows the ability for the tension that would be involved to be dissolved in large part. The divestment of the creation of the armies is a legislative thing, and the use of the armies is an executive thing. Now, legislator, Congress, holds the power to declare war, but the president is the commander-in-chief because he is able to immediately respond to immediate threats without having to go through the deliberations. Our standing army has proven to be something that we need time and time again. And we have the best trained, best equipped military systems on the planet. We are by far and wide much better than every single other fighting force on the entirety of the planet. And it is because of the things outlined here. We do need the ability to immediately respond. The thought that the militia by itself is enough is kind of foolish, because if there is a large-scale invasion, now I'm not talking about a plane dropping off a few people, right? Because I'm going to tell you what's going to happen here in the South. If you got a plane and they're dropping out paratroopers and they're the wrong people, they're not making it to the ground. Rules of war be damned. We will engage. We will destroy. That will happen. I guarantee it. And so the ability for the citizenry to respond is a fundamental defense mechanism, but it is only meant to be temporary, because as much as I am in favor of defense of this country, my neighbor down the street may be equally in defense of this country, equally fervent that we need to repel communists, right? But we may disagree on how to do that. And so we are not as cohesive of a fighting force as people who have trained together, who have fought together, who have gone through the actions that create a cohesive unit, because it is much better to be in a cooperative unit. That is the reason for our standing armies, despite the fact that it is an enormous drain on our systems. Now, that enormous drain is due in large part to waste. It is due in large part to us, again, abdicating our responsibilities. It is our responsibilities as citizens to ensure that our money is spent wisely. $50,000 toilet seats is not wisely. There are absolutely ways that we can make that better. There are absolutely ways that we can make it more efficient and make it more beneficial to us. But we have to pick up the responsibility for that. We cannot continuously push that responsibility off on someone else, especially someone else whose entire plan is to be in public service, because that's how they're going to get rich. You should never get rich from public service. This entire system is meant to be one of temporary nature, that we can rely upon the temporary nature of it to keep it honest. And we're not doing that, right? We're having Mitch McConnell in there for 30 years. We're having Joe Biden in there for 30 years. We're having these continuous uniparty players who are simply draining the money. They are the reason why we pay so much in taxes. They are the reason why our money is wasted in large part. We, as citizens, need to take up the responsibility for that. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a not too difficult topic, right? There wasn't a whole lot of deep discussion in this. This was an absolute necessity, and it's kind of silly, right, looking back through history, that this argument had to be made, but we're having to make the same arguments now. We're having to say now that our military is a necessity because we're having problems with it. Now, we have allowed weak men to become in charge, and that is a problem. That is, again, a responsibility issue. We have allowed people who are unsure what their genetic makeup is to be in charge of our fighting force, and that is a ridiculous statement to make. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.